The distress signal pulsed weakly against the backdrop of the galactic core, a desperate plea from a system on the brink. What the Voxari didn't realize was that their cry for help was about to unleash something far more ancient and far more powerful than they could possibly imagine: humanity. Juno wrestled with a recalcitrant power conduit, sparks spitting from the frayed wires like angry insects. The Voxari engineering bay reeked of ozone and desperation. Makeshift biohazard suits, cobbled together from scavenged materials and held together with biosealant, lay discarded in the corners, silent testaments to the creeping plague that was devouring her world. Each cough from Juno echoed in the chamber, a stark reminder of how few were left to even try. Her multifaceted eyes darted between the flickering holographic schematics and the damaged communication array, its once gleaming surface now scarred with scorch marks and jury-rigged repairs. With a final, desperate surge of energy, Juno initiated the emergency broadcast. "This is Voxari Prime," her voice crackled through the damaged speakers, permeated with static. "We are under quarantine. The great rot consumes us. We require immediate assistance. Repeat, we require immediate assistance." It was a whisper cast into the void, her last fragile hope. The SOS signal, weakened by the damaged equipment and the vast gulf of interstellar space, barely escaped the Voxari system. It limped through the cosmic darkness, a dying ember in the face of oblivion. Unbeknownst to Juno, the signal, in its weakened state, inadvertently bypassed multiple failsafe protocols on a derelict, ancient vessel drifting in the same sector. A ghost ship, forgotten by time and galactic cartographers, it held secrets older than most known civilizations. On board the derelict ship, cryopods, row upon row of gleaming metal coffins, began to malfunction erratically as a result of the signal's energy surge. Warning lights flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the silent chamber. The hum of the life support system sputtered and surged, a discordant symphony of impending failure. A single cryopod, nestled deep within the ship's frozen heart, showed particularly violent signs of unstable revival. Its internal systems sparked and flickered, the cryogenic fluids within churning violently. Alarms dormant for millennia began to bleat, their piercing cries cutting through the silence. Back on Voxari Prime, Juno detected the energy surge originating from the derelict ship. Her heart clenched. "Krill," she hissed, fear tightening her throat. The Krill Collective, the architects of the Great Rot, were known for their brutal efficiency and their tendency to eliminate any potential resistance. She braced for impact, misinterpreting the surge as an imminent attack. Driven by a desperate need to protect what remained of her people, Juno rerouted power from secondary life support systems to defensive energy shields. A calculated risk, but one she felt compelled to take. The engineering bay dimmed, the air growing colder, but the shields flickered to life, a fragile barrier against the perceived threat. On the derelict ship, the failing cryopod's life support system flatlined with a final, agonizing groan. The alarms intensified, their shrill cries echoing through the empty corridors. The cryogenic fluids boiled away, revealing the figure within. A status screen, cracked and faded, flickered to life beside the failing pod, displaying a name: Douglas Jones, Systems Engineer. The screen struggled to maintain power, the letters blurring in and out of focus. For a fleeting moment, the screen displayed a brief data burst, a fragment of the ship's ancient mission parameters. The vessel was designated as a seed vessel, a relic of a long-lost colony program. Its purpose: to seed new worlds with the genetic material and technological knowledge of a forgotten civilization. The data burst also mentioned that all other pods were currently stable, but reliant on consistent power output to prevent cascade failure. A single disruption could trigger a chain reaction, dooming the entire mission. Juno, unaware of the catastrophic internal consequences of her actions, gripped her energy rifle, her multifaceted eyes scanning the star-strewn sky. She prepared for an imminent Krill attack, unaware that her salvation and possibly her doom was waking up. The alarms blared, a discordant symphony of shrieks and klaxons that clawed at Douglas Jones's skull. Flashing crimson lights pulsed against his eyelids, even before they snapped open. He gasped, a ragged, wet sound as his lungs fought to draw in air that tasted stale and metallic. His muscles screamed in protest, each twitch a searing reminder of centuries spent in suspended animation. He tried to sit up, but his limbs felt like lead, unresponsive and weak. Fragments of memory flickered through his mind: Earth, war, the promise of a new beginning, but they were fleeting, intangible as smoke. On a nearby monitor, Juno watched the energy readings spike erratically. The human vessel, derelict as it appeared, was emitting a chaotic signature. Her mandibles clicked in agitation. This wasn't merely a disabled ship, it was a threat. The readings pulsed like a wounded animal, unpredictable and dangerous. She tightened her grip on the firing controls, her claw hovering over the launch sequence. Inside the pod, Douglas finally managed to access the internal diagnostics. Lines of alien script scrolled across the screen, but he recognized the underlying logic: power fluctuations, life support failure, imminent cascade. The cryo systems were collapsing, threatening to plunge the remaining occupants into a frozen oblivion. He fumbled for the communication panel, his fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. He needed to override the system, to shut down the failing regulators before it was too late. He jabbed at the glowing symbols, but the interface was alien, unresponsive to his touch. Frustration welled up inside him, a bitter tide against the encroaching disorientation. A jolt rocked the pod, throwing him against the restraining straps. Outside, Juno had fired a warning shot. The energy blast slammed into the hull, further destabilizing the already fragile cryo systems. Alarms blared even louder, the flashing lights intensified, and a new, more urgent warning flashed across the diagnostic screen: containment breach imminent. The cryopod hissed, a high-pitched whine that escalated into a deafening shriek. Then, with a violent shudder, the containment door blew open, sending a cloud of supercooled vapor billowing into the chamber. Douglas tumbled out, landing hard on the cold metal floor. His head swam, his vision blurred, and his body trembled uncontrollably. The alien atmosphere burned in his lungs, each breath a painful reminder that he was no longer on Earth. He pushed himself up, his legs threatening to buckle beneath him. Through the security camera, Juno watched the human emerge from the pod. It was smaller than she had anticipated, fragile-looking, but it was alive. Her mandibles twitched, life where there should have been only death. She activated the launch sequence for a heavily armed shuttle. "Prepare for boarding," she commanded, her voice tight with apprehension. "Full weapons array. This could be hostile." Douglas, ignoring the pain that racked his body, focused on the ship's power distribution network. He could see the energy conduits, glowing with an unstable light, pulsing erratically like a dying heart. The entire system was on the verge of collapse. He stumbled forward, driven by a primal urge to fix what was broken. He recognized the architecture, the underlying principles. This wasn't just a ship. It was a seed ship designed to carry life to establish colonies on distant worlds. A wave of sadness washed over him. Had they failed? Was he the only one left? The shuttle docked with a jarring clang. Juno, flanked by two heavily armed guards, cautiously entered the derelict ship. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. She saw the damaged cryopods, the flickering lights, the signs of catastrophic system failure. Then she saw him, the human. He was hunched over a console, his face pale and drawn, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He turned, his eyes unfocused, and tried to speak, but only a garbled string of sounds escaped his lips. "Can you understand me?" Juno asked, her voice amplified by her helmet. Douglas blinked, trying to clear his head. The alien's words were meaningless, but he could sense the urgency in her tone. He pointed to the failing power conduits, tracing their path with a trembling finger. He needed to show her to make her understand the danger. Juno frowned. The human was clearly impaired, his movements erratic, his speech unintelligible. But she recognized the universal symbol for danger, the frantic gestures, the wide, desperate eyes. He was trying to warn her about something. His strength gave out. Douglas collapsed, his body unable to withstand the combined effects of cryo-sleep in the hostile environment. Juno lunged forward, catching him before he hit the ground. His skin was cold, clammy. He was dying. She hesitated. He was an alien, a potential threat. But something in his eyes, in his desperate attempt to communicate, resonated with her. He wasn't attacking, he was trying to help. "Get him to the main console," she ordered her guards, her voice resolute. "Now maybe he can still save this ship, and those still in stasis." Her decision was made. She would trust this alien. Together, they supported Douglas, dragging him towards the central control station, hoping that his knowledge, however fragmented, could prevent total system failure. Juno's three-fingered hand, surprisingly strong, looped under Douglas's armpit, hauling him towards the flickering console. Each step sent a jolt of pain through his body, a symphony of protest from muscles dormant for centuries. The air tasted metallic, thick with the ozone tang of failing machinery. She offered him a bulbous, translucent canteen filled with a liquid that shimmered faintly. Douglas hesitated, then took a tentative sip. It was cool, almost tasteless, but eased the sandpaper rasp in his throat. Juno watched him, her large black eyes conveying a silent plea for understanding. Douglas, ignoring the throbbing in his head, pointed a shaky finger at a series of rapidly scrolling readouts on the console. Crimson warnings pulsed urgently amidst a cascade of alien script. He tapped the screen insistently, focusing on the energy distribution matrix. Life support was hemorrhaging power. Juno, her brow furrowed in concentration, began manipulating the controls, her movements jerky but determined. She attempted to reroute power from auxiliary systems, but the failing systems seemed to resist her efforts, the console buzzing with escalating fury. Douglas winced, a sharp pain stabbing through his ribs. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and spat a fleck of blood onto the grimy deck. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, mirroring the taste in his mouth. A secondary power surge, a violent eruption of sparks and crackling energy, overloaded a nearby control panel. Blue arcs danced across its surface, showering Juno with a deadly rain of electrical fire. Adrenaline, a forgotten chemical cocktail, flooded Douglas's system. He lurched forward, ignoring the searing pain in his limbs, and shoved Juno out of the way. The brunt of the surge hit him, searing his exposed skin. He cried out, a strangled gasp, as pain blossomed across his arms and chest. Ignoring the burning agony, Douglas quickly assessed the damage. The panel was fried, a smoking ruin of melted circuits and twisted metal. But he saw a potential workaround, a redundant bypass system, designed for emergencies, now tantalizingly out of reach behind the ruined panel. With a grunt of effort, Douglas wrestled a thick data cable from a nearby port and jammed it directly into the damaged system, bypassing the ruined controls. The console flickered, hesitated, then roared back to life, the crimson warnings receding, replaced by a more stable, though still precarious, green. Juno stared at Douglas, her mandibles clicking softly in what he could only interpret as astonishment. He understood the systems, these alien systems, far better than she had anticipated. She noticed the angry red burns blooming across his skin, a testament to his sacrifice. She retrieved a small, compact medical kit from a wall-mounted compartment. Her movements were efficient, practiced, as she applied a cooling gel to Douglas's burns. The gel, strangely scented with something like cinnamon and ozone, eased the burning, but did little to numb the deeper ache. While Juno tended to him, Douglas continued to work, his fingers flying across the console, rerouting power from non-essential systems, lighting, environmental controls in less critical sectors to the failing life support systems. Every adjustment was a gamble, a delicate balancing act with the ship's dwindling reserves. He managed to stabilize the cryosystems, preventing further cascade failures. The green lights on the console held steady, but he knew it was a temporary reprieve, a dam holding back a flood. The underlying problems remained, festering like a slow-burning fire. Juno, having finished tending to his burns, pointed a slender finger at a holographic display that shimmered above the console. It showed the planet below, a swirling canvas of blues and browns, marred by sickly patches of gray. She then pointed to herself, then to him, a silent plea etched on her face. She needed his help. Douglas fumbled with his wrist device, a relic from a forgotten age. He activated the universal translator, its algorithms whirring to life, bridging the chasm of language. Juno spoke, her voice a melodic series of clicks and whistles, now rendered into broken but understandable English. "My people, dying, great rot, consumes." She gestured again at the holographic display, the sickly gray patches now seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. "Distress, signal, last, hope." Douglas, the disorientation finally receding, replaced by a grim understanding, looked at her, his gaze hardening with purpose. How long until the systems fail again? Juno met his eyes, her own filled with a desperate plea. Less than a day. Juno didn't wait for an answer. "The cryo systems are failing faster than we anticipated. We need to get to my homeworld. Now." She grabbed his arm, pulling him towards a small and Opekainus transport ship docked nearby. The interior smelled of ozone and antiseptic, the air thick with a low, persistent hum. As the ship lifted off, Douglas stared out the viewport. What he saw stole his breath, but not in a good way. The Voxari homeworld was dying. Swaths of the planet were covered in a sickly, brown-purple blight, the Great Rot. Forests were skeletal, their branches reaching towards the sky like accusing fingers. Rivers flowed with a viscous, black sludge. The infrastructure below was crumbling, buildings scarred with the same creeping decay that plagued the landscape. The transport shuddered as it landed in a dusty clearing. A crowd of Voxari had gathered, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension. Some looked at Douglas with open curiosity, others with undisguised fear and suspicion. A few muttered insults under their breath, their multi-jointed hands clenching into fists. Juno stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority despite the tremor of exhaustion beneath it. "People of Voxar, this is Douglas Jones. He is a healer, a technician, a survivor from a lost age. He has come to help us. I know he is not one of us, but we are beyond pride. We are beyond prejudice. We are dying. Give him a chance to save us." She turned to Douglas, her eyes pleading. "Show them." Juno led him through the crowd, their path a gauntlet of wary glances and hushed whispers. They arrived at a sprawling complex, a central medical hub. Inside, the scene was overwhelming. Makeshift beds lined the corridors, filled with Voxari citizens in various stages of decay. The air was thick with the cloying stench of rot and desperation. Medical personnel, their faces etched with exhaustion, rushed between patients, their efforts clearly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the crisis. In the center of the hub lay a prominent Voxari elder, his once vibrant blue skin now mottled with the telltale purple of the rot. His breathing was shallow and ragged, his eyes glazed over with pain. He was a symbol of their fading hope. Douglas knelt beside him, pulling out a portable medical scanner, a relic from his past life. He activated the device, its familiar hum a small comfort in this alien hellscape. "I need to get a baseline reading," he explained, his voice rough. "It will help me understand the rot's progression." A wave of resistance rippled through the surrounding Voxari. "No," one shouted, his voice imbued with fear. "We don't know what that thing will do. Keep your human devices away from him." "It's for his own good," Douglas retorted, frustration building. I can't help him if I don't know what I'm dealing with. Juno stepped forward, placing a hand on the arm of the agitated Voxari. Please, she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. I understand your fear, but we have to trust him. This device. It can give us answers. Answers we desperately need. She turned to the crowd, her eyes pleading. He is trying to help. The Voxari hesitated, their faces torn between fear and desperation. Finally, with a collective sigh of resignation, they stepped back. Douglas quickly scanned the elder, his face grim as the readings came in. His condition is critical. The rot is far more aggressive than I anticipated. We don't have much time. He looked up at Juno, his eyes filled with a newfound drive. I don't know if I can cure this, but I promise you, I will do everything in my power to find a way. A few murmurs of encouragement rippled through the crowd, a fragile seed of hope taking root in the face of despair. The Voxari elder coughed, a rattling, wet sound that sent a chill down Douglas's spine. His eyes flickered, then closed. Suddenly, a Voxari guard rushed towards Juno, his multi-jointed limbs flailing wildly. Juno, we have a problem, a complete failure of the cryo systems back on the derelict ship, all systems offline. Juno's face paled. No, the weight of the situation crashed down on Douglas. The loss of the cryo ship meant the potential loss of invaluable human knowledge, technology, and most importantly, the other humans in cryo sleep. Their time was running out. Just then, a garbled message crackled through the Voxari communication system. Static filled the air, followed by a distorted voice. The static crackled, a persistent hiss that grated on Juno's auditory receptors. She leaned closer to the console, her antennae twitching, filtering the noise for any semblance of coherent communication. Suddenly, a burst of clarity, a fleeting window through the interference. A voice, raspy and desperate, filled the comms. Are coming, the shadows. Krill, beware. Then, silence, the transmission severed, leaving only the agonizing static. Juno straightened, her multifaceted eyes wide with alarm. That was Sector Gamma 9, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The research outpost they were developing, countermeasures against the Great Rot. Elder Vorik, his carapace scarred with age, approached the console, his movements slow but deliberate. A flicker of recognition ignited in his ancient eyes. The Krill. He rasped, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. We have not spoken them in. Cycles uncounted, but the legends, they remain. He turned his gaze towards Douglas, his expression shifting as if seeing something beyond the human's physical form. Long ago, in another time of crisis, the legends tell of star guardians who came to our aid. Could it be? Star guardians? Juno questioned, tilting her head. The stories speak of beings from beyond the stars, Vorik continued, ignoring her interruption, who possessed knowledge and technology beyond our comprehension. They helped us fight a plague that threatened to consume us. Before they left, they hid a vault of advanced technology on a remote island, ravaged by the rot, as a last resort. A place only those with a unique connection could find. Vorik turned back to Douglas. The legends said they would return in our darkest hour, perhaps. You are connected to these star guardians. He paused, then spoke with renewed urgency. The island. It is our only hope. It may hold the key to curing the Great Rot, or at least, to fighting the Krill. I'll go, Douglas stated, his voice firm. Juno stepped forward. I will go with you. My immunity to the rot will be invaluable. A Voxari scientist, his lab coat stained with various organic compounds, scoffed. Elder, with all due respect, this is madness. The island is a death trap teeming with mutated creatures, and those star guardian stories are just that, stories. We need to focus on practical solutions, not chasing ancient myths. Douglas met the scientist's gaze. That colony's distress signal wasn't a myth. They were working on those practical solutions you mentioned. Now they're silent. We need more resources, more information. That vault might be our only chance. Juno nodded, already accessing the transport schedules. I'll arrange a ship immediately. As Juno worked, a mechanic approached her, his mandibles clicking nervously. Honored Juno, there seems to be a problem with the Starlight's engines. I think someone sabotaged them. The launch will be delayed. Douglas's eyes narrowed. He moved toward the engine schematics displayed on a nearby screen, his fingers flying across the controls. The fuel lines are deliberately crimped, and the ignition sequence has been rerouted. He looked up, a grim expression on his face. It'll take a few hours to fix. Unless... He grabbed a nearby welding tool, the hum of its power cell filling the air. Within minutes, sparks flew as Douglas bypassed the damaged fuel lines with practiced ease. He rerouted the ignition sequence, his movements efficient and precise. Juno watched, her respect for the human growing with each passing moment. Engines are back online, Douglas announced, wiping sweat from his brow. We can leave now. Juno turned to the small group of Voxari who had been watching Douglas work, their faces a mixture of awe and resentment. Who did this? She demanded. Douglas stepped forward, his tone calm and measured. I know some of you are afraid. You distrust me, you distrust the legends, you fear what I might unleash, but that fear is blinding you. The Krill are coming. The rot is spreading. We need to stand together. We need to take this chance. Without waiting for a response, Douglas turned and headed towards the transport ship. Juno followed, a determined glint in her eyes. The starlight pierced through the atmosphere, leaving the relative safety of the Voxari homeworld behind. As they approached the island, a desolate landscape filled their viewports. Twisted, gnarled trees clawed at the sky, their branches coated in a viscous, green slime. The ground was a festering wound of decaying vegetation and unnatural growths. The air hung thick with the stench of rot and decay, a palpable wave of sickness that assaulted their senses. This is worse than I imagined, Juno murmured, her voice strained. As they disembarked, the ground crunched beneath their feet, a symphony of decay. A guttural growl echoed through the distorted landscape. From behind a cluster of mutated fungi, a creature emerged, a Voxari, but warped beyond recognition. Its carapace was cracked and oozing, its limbs contorted into grotesque shapes, its eyes burning with a malevolent hunger. Douglas raised his weapon, a pulse rifle he had salvaged from the cryo ship. Stay behind me, Juno. More creatures emerged, their numbers growing with each passing second. They lunged, their claws dripping with corrosive fluids. Douglas opened fire, the pulse rifle spitting bolts of energy, vaporizing the mutated horrors with each shot. Juno, despite her fear, moved through the thick of them, testing the air with her antenna, reading the subtle flow of toxins in the atmosphere. This way, she shouted, pointing towards a particularly dense patch of mutated vegetation. My immunity. It allows me to sense the least contaminated path. Following Juno's lead, they navigated through the toxic landscape, narrowly avoiding pools of corrosive slime and swarms of mutated insects. Finally, they reached their destination, a monolithic structure half buried in the earth, its surface covered in strange geometric patterns. This is it, Douglas said, his voice filled with awe. The entrance to the vault. He examined the structure, his fingers tracing the alien symbols. I don't recognize this technology. It's completely alien to anything I've ever seen. It looks like the system uses brain waves. Juno stepped forward, placing her hand on a smooth obsidian panel. I can try. My people are born with the ability to interface with technology through our minds. Closing her eyes, she focused, her antennae twitching rhythmically. A faint blue light emanated from the panel, and a low hum filled the air. With a resounding click, a section of the structure slid open, revealing a dark, yawning passage. As they ventured deeper into the complex, a surge of energy pulsed through the air. Alarms blared, their sound echoing through the desolate landscape. A red light flashed on the control panel. A planet-wide alarm system had been triggered, signaling an unknown entity. As Douglas passed through the doorway, a jolt of energy surged through him, and he staggered, clutching his head. Visions flooded his mind. Images of humans and Voxari working side by side, sharing technology and knowledge, their faces filled with hope. But the vision twisted, turning into a nightmare of death and destruction, of cities burning and bodies strewn across a ravaged landscape. Then just as suddenly as it began, the vision ended. Douglas gasped for air, his heart pounding in his chest. Above them, the sky ripped open. A ship, sleek and menacing, broke through the atmosphere, heading directly towards their coordinates. Douglas and Juno stepped into the vault. The heavy door hissed shut behind them, sealing them inside. A vast chamber opened before them, filled with towering structures of polished obsidian and shimmering crystal. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the floor, rising up through their boots and settling in their chests. Complex arrays of light pulsed across the walls, casting the room in an ethereal glow. Holographic displays flickered to life, projecting intricate patterns and symbols into the air. Suddenly, a harsh, digital voice crackled through the vault speakers. "Unidentified vessel, you are broadcasting a distress signal. This is the axiom of purity. State your intentions. We are prepared to offer humanitarian aid." The message was in Voxari, but something about the tone felt off. Juno's mandibles twitched. "Aid," she murmured, her multifaceted eyes narrowed. "They move quickly, too quickly." She turned to Douglas, her voice low. "It is not in our nature to be suspicious, but the Krill, they are masters of deception." Douglas moved towards the holographic displays, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of a control panel. The images shifted and swirled, coalescing into a coherent narrative. He saw images of verdant Voxari worlds, teeming with life, slowly consumed by a creeping organic blight, the Great Rot. He watched as entire ecosystems collapsed, as Voxari cities crumbled, and as the plague spread like an unstoppable wildfire. "This is a history," he said, his voice hushed, "of the rot." The images zoomed in, focusing on the microscopic level. Douglas saw the rot's complex molecular structure, its insidious method of attack. It's not just a disease, he realized. It's a bioengineered weapon, designed to target specific genetic markers. He traced the rot's origin to a single point, a remote research facility on a Krill-controlled world, and incredibly sophisticated. "Look at the precision targeting." Juno stepped closer, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. This vault, it was not just a shelter, it was a laboratory, a place to find a way to fight back. The speakers crackled again, the tone of the message hardening. "Voxari vessel, you have failed to respond. We have detected a significant biohazard threat emanating from your location. We are authorized to intervene. Grant us immediate access to your planet." Juno's eyes widened as she accessed a database on a nearby console. Lines of code scrolled past, resolving into genetic sequences. "Douglas, look, these are genetic samples, Voxari who are immune to the rot." Her fingers danced across the controls, highlighting a specific sequence, "including me. My genetic structure, it's resistant." Douglas examined the schematics displayed beside the genetic data. It's a synthesizer. It can create a cure using those genetic samples as a template." He followed the energy pathways, tracing the flow of power. "But it requires a rare element, Zalosian ore, found only on Krill-controlled worlds." The transmission abruptly cut off, replaced by a new, far more aggressive signal. "This is the Krill collective warship Oblivion's Edge. You are in violation of interstellar law. You are harboring illegal biotechnology. Prepare to be boarded." Alarms blared as several small, dart-like vessels detached from the Oblivion's Edge and streaked towards the island. "Scout drones," Douglas said grimly. "They're scanning for us." The holographic displays flickered, showing the drones' progress as they rapidly mapped the island's surface, their sensors pinpointing the vault's location. "The alarm," Juno whispered, her voice filled with dread. "It didn't just wake us, it signaled them." Douglas ran to another console, his fingers flying across the controls. This vault has defenses, energy shields, automated turrets, but they're untested. We don't know if they'll even work. It is our only chance, Juno said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. We must activate them. We must protect the cure. She reached for a large, red button in the center of the console. With a deep breath, she slammed her palm down. The vault shuddered as the defense system sprang to life. Energy crackled around the perimeter, forming a shimmering shield that enveloped the island. From hidden compartments, a swarm of sleek metallic drones launched into the air, intercepting the Krill scouts. Lasers flashed, and the drones exploded in brilliant bursts of light. They're down. Douglas shouted, relief flooding his face. But the relief was short-lived. One of the holographic displays showed a close-up of a Krill drone, its optical sensors transmitting images back to the Oblivion's edge before it was destroyed. The vault's location had been confirmed. Above them, the Oblivion's edge began to glow with power, its weapons charging. The air crackled with energy. Juno stared at the display, her face pale. The shields, they will not hold against a direct assault. Douglas's mind raced. They needed help and fast. Wait, we need to communicate with the home world. They're closer than any Krill ships. The island shuddered. Plasma torpedoes slammed against the energy shield protecting the vault, the air thick with the scent of ozone and burning metal. Alarms blared, a cacophony of screeching warnings that vibrated through bone. The shield flickered, a shimmering dome of blue energy momentarily buckling under the relentless assault. Juno's hand trembled as she kept the shield active. The shields, they're not holding. She shouted over the din, her voice strained. Douglas moved quickly, his eyes scanning the holographic schematics projected above the central console. Vault defenses are designed for containment, not direct assault. Power grids antiquated. Shield matrix is unstable. We need to reroute auxiliary power. He began punching commands into a nearby terminal, his fingers flying across the unfamiliar Voxari interface. Sparks erupted from a damaged conduit, showering him with hot debris. Juno rushed to his side, attempting to extinguish the small flames licking at his sleeve. "Careful," he yelled, shoving her gently aside. "I need you to stabilize the primary power regulator. It's about to overload." While Juno wrestled with the glowing regulator, Douglas continued his work, rerouting power from the vault's non-essential systems to reinforce the shields. The lights dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows across the chamber. "That'll buy us some time," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Now, let's try that distress signal." He accessed the vault's long-range communication array, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Come on, baby, reach out and touch someone." Static filled the chamber, punctuated by bursts of crackling energy. The signal strength wavered, struggling against an unseen force. "They're jamming us," Juno cried, her voice permeated with desperation. "The Krill. They knew we'd try to call for help." Her shoulders slumped, her usual bright optimism replaced by a crushing sense of despair. "What's the point?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the alarms. "We're trapped, my people. They're all going to die." Douglas stopped what he was doing and turned to face her, his expression firm. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Hey, look at me. You're not trapped and your people aren't dead yet. You're the one who sent the signal. You're the one who brought me here. You're a leader, Juno. Don't give up now. Not when we're just getting started." Before Juno could respond, a series of metallic thuds echoed through the vault. "Boarding pods." Douglas shouted, his eyes widening. "They're trying to breach the vault from multiple angles." He raced back to the console, his mind working furiously. "Okay, think. Containment vault. Internal systems." An idea sparked in his mind. He began reprogramming the vault's environmental control system, flooding certain sections with inert gas. He then activated the automated maintenance drones, turning them into makeshift security guards. "Juno, I need your help," he said, his voice urgent. "You know this vault better than anyone. Guide me. Tell me where the weak points are, where they're likely to try to break through. Juno straightened her shoulders, her eyes hardening with grit. I'm with you, she said, her voice filled with newfound perseverance. The first Krill boarding parties began to penetrate the vault, their weapons firing. The maintenance drones engaged them in close quarters combat, their mechanical limbs tearing at the Krill warriors. But the Krill were relentless, their numbers overwhelming the drones. They're using cloaking technology. Douglas exclaimed, his voice filled with frustration. I can't see them. He banged his head on the console, then paused, a look of inspiration spreading across his face. Wait a minute. He began repurposing a sensor array, recalibrating it to detect the energy signatures of the cloaked Krill. The array flickered to life, painting the invisible warriors with a faint, ethereal glow. There, he shouted, pointing at the holographic display. Drones, target those coordinates. The drones swiveled, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. The cloaked Krill fell, their bodies dissolving into shimmering dust. Suddenly, the alarms intensified, the lights flickering violently. The energy shield buckled, then shattered completely, showering the vault with sparks and debris. The shields are down, Juno cried, her voice filled with despair. Douglas glanced at the communication array, his face grim. The distress signal's not getting through. Krill jamming's too strong, vault tech's too outdated. He took a deep breath, his eyes hardening with dedication. Okay, new plan. We don't have the power to maintain a sustained signal, but maybe, just maybe. He began rerouting the remaining power, focusing it into a short burst transmission. We send a quick burst, containing our location and a warning about the Krill. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. He initiated the sequence, his finger hovering over the activation button. Here goes nothing. The vault trembled as the short burst message was sent, a desperate plea hurled into the vastness of space. But its success was uncertain, a fragile hope flickering in the face of overwhelming odds. A grinding, metallic screech echoed through the vault. The main entrance, weakened by the relentless bombardment, finally gave way. The doors buckled inward, revealing a swarm of Krill warriors, their weapons trained on Douglas and Juno. Juno stood tall, her eyes blazing with defiance. She drew a small energy pistol, her hand steady. This is where we make our stand, she said, her voice filled with unyielding commitment. For my people, for the vault. The vault's main entrance detonated inward, a concussive blast of superheated plasma and twisted durasteel. The remaining defense drones, pathetically outgunned, sparked and died in a chorus of electronic screams. Krill poured through the breach, their chitinous armor gleaming under the flickering emergency lights, weapons spitting emerald bolts of energy. Juno roared a command in Voxari, her voice barely audible over the din. She raised her pulse rifle, firing a controlled burst at the advancing Krill. Beside her, Douglas squeezed off shots from his scavenged weapon, the rounds impacting harmlessly against the Krill armor. He cursed under his breath. Useless. He dropped to a crouch, motioning for Juno and the handful of surviving Voxari soldiers to follow. Fall back, funnel them. Douglas darted behind a massive data conduit, its surface scarred by previous battles. He ripped a panel off the wall, exposing a tangle of wires. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he short-circuited the system, sending a shower of sparks into the Krill's path as they rounded the corner. A guttural shriek echoed as one of the Krill stumbled, its armor momentarily disrupted. Juno, meanwhile, positioned the Voxari soldiers behind overturned consoles, providing covering fire. Her tactical awareness was sharp, honed by years of defending against Krill incursions. Hold the line, don't let them advance. Suddenly, a new threat emerged. Smaller, more agile drones, no larger than a human head, phased through the solid walls of the vault, bypassing their defenses entirely. Their energy weapons, silent and deadly, cut down 2 Voxari soldiers before anyone could react. What in God's name? Douglas muttered, firing wildly at the phasing drones. The shots passed right through them, leaving no visible effect. Their conventional weapons were useless. Juno's eyes widened. The Zenthai's project, the countermeasures, there's a hidden armory. She pointed towards a reinforced blast door at the far end of the vault. It's our only chance. They fought their way towards the armory, the Krill relentless in their pursuit. Douglas felt a searing pain in his side as a stray energy bolt grazed his armor. He stumbled, but Juno caught him, pulling him forward. Keep moving. We're almost there. Reaching the blast door, Juno frantically worked the access panel. The heavy door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with weapon racks, but their hopes were quickly dashed. Most of the racks were empty, and those that weren't held weapons that were clearly damaged or offline. Damn it! Juno slammed her fist against a console. The Zenthai's project was abandoned years ago. We stripped it for parts. Douglas ignored her frustration, his eyes scanning the chamber. He spotted a single, high-powered energy rifle mounted on a pedestal. Its design was archaic, but its potential was undeniable. That rifle, can you get it online? Juno examined the weapon. It's a prototype. The energy cell is unstable. It could overload at any moment. I'll take my chances. Douglas grabbed the rifle, his fingers flying across the control panel. He bypassed safety protocols, rerouted power conduits, pushing the weapon beyond its design limits. I can boost the output, but it'll shorten its lifespan. We'll only get a few shots. He adjusted a final setting, and the rifle hummed with nearly unleashed energy. A faint crackling sound emanated from the energy cell. It was a gamble, but it was their only hope. The phasing drones reappeared, their energy weapons charging. Douglas raised the modified energy rifle, took aim, and fired. A beam of pure energy lanced out, vaporizing one of the drones instantly. He fired again, and another drone winked out of existence. The Krill, momentarily stunned by the sudden effectiveness of their weapon, faltered. Douglas pressed his advantage, eliminating several more drones before the rifle began to sputter. The Krill adapted quickly, focusing their fire on Douglas. Energy bolts hammered against his makeshift cover, forcing him to retreat. The energy rifle coughed, its power fluctuating wildly. "It's overloading," Juno shouted. "We need to recharge it." Without hesitation, Juno stepped out from behind cover, drawing the Krill's fire. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her injuries, weaving through the energy blasts. "Over here, you ugly bastards!" she yelled, drawing their attention away from Douglas. Douglas, taking advantage of the diversion, frantically worked to stabilize the energy rifle. He rerouted power, recalibrated the focusing array, pushing his engineering skills to the absolute limit. Suddenly, his internal comm crackled to life. "Douglas, we have incoming. Secondary breach detected. They're using cutting torches." It was one of the surviving Voxari soldiers, his voice filled with panic. Douglas glanced at the security monitors. The Krill were attacking the vault's secondary entrances, their cutting torches slicing through the reinforced doors. They were being flanked. "We can't hold this position," Juno said, returning to his side, her armor scorched and smoking. "We need to fall back, deeper into the vault." As they retreated, Douglas noticed something he hadn't seen before, a hidden passage concealed behind a collapsed section of wall. It was narrow and dark, leading into an unknown section of the vault. "This way," Douglas shouted, motioning for Juno and the remaining soldiers to follow. They squeezed through the passage, Douglas bringing up the rear. He triggered a manual override, sealing the passage behind them with a grinding groan of metal on metal. They had bought themselves some time, but the vault shook violently as the Krill began breaching the vault on a larger scale. The passage sloped downwards into the unknown depths of the vault. The passage descended into darkness, the rough-hewn rock scraping against Douglas's makeshift bandage. Behind them, the vault door groaned under a renewed assault, the metallic shriek of Krill cutting tools echoing through the narrow space. Juno pressed ahead, her bioluminescent markings providing the only source of light. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the ozone scent of failing power conduits. The passage opened abruptly, revealing a vast underground chamber. Above, unseen machinery hummed with latent power. Consoles, their surfaces etched with glowing symbols, lined the walls like dormant sentinels. The scale of it was breathtaking, a hidden city beneath a dying world. Juno stopped, her multifaceted eyes wide. The ancestors' cradle, she whispered, reverence lacing her voice. A Voxari research facility, abandoned millennia ago. Douglas ran a hand over a console, the smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the rough stone they had just traversed. He activated his scanner, the beam cutting through the gloom. Ancient, all right. Power signatures are off the charts, but the systems are fragmented, like they were expecting to be shut down, but something interrupted the process. As Douglas worked, the screens flickered to life, displaying complex schematics and biological diagrams. Juno gasped, recoiling from the nearest console. This isn't right. These symbols, they speak of biological manipulation. Weaponization. Douglas's scanner locked onto a schematic. This facility, it wasn't just researching life, it was dissecting it, weaponizing it. I'm seeing a precursor strain here, a modified pathogen. It's related to the Great Rot. Juno stared at the glowing symbols, her body tree no-ing. Number, our ancestors wouldn't. They couldn't. Her voice cracked, disbelief warring with horror. This is a lie, Krill propaganda. Suddenly, the chamber lurched to life. Red lights pulsed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Automated turrets, previously hidden within the walls, whirred into position, their energy weapons trained on Douglas and Juno. A synthesized voice boomed through the chamber. Intruders detected. Initiate security protocols. Defense systems. Juno cried, pulling Douglas behind a deactivated console. This facility is still active. We have to get out of here. Energy bolts seared the air, vaporizing sections of the consoles. Douglas, scrambling for cover, cursed. We're not getting out. Not with those things firing. I need to find a way to shut them down. He pulled a small device from his belt, a multi-tool capable of interfacing with a variety of systems. They moved through the maze-like facility, a deadly dance of evasion and technical prowess. Douglas, guided by Juno's knowledge of the facility's layout, worked feverishly to bypass the automated defenses. He rerouted power conduits, disabled sensor arrays, and even managed to reprogram one of the turrets to target its companions. Finally, they reached a heavily fortified vault, its entrance sealed by a complex energy field. This is it, Juno said, her voice tight with apprehension. The central repository, the heart of their research. Douglas bypassed the energy field with a series of rapid commands. The vault door hissed open, revealing rows of cryo chambers and storage units. Within them, glowing vials contained viscous fluids and biological samples. He scanned the contents of one of the vials. This is it, he said, his voice grim. The original bioweapon, and potential countermeasures, stabilizers, inhibitors. But as he analyzed the data, his expression darkened. These countermeasures, they're highly unstable, the side effects. They could be catastrophic. We're talking about ecological collapse, genetic mutations. Juno stared at the vials, her face etched with conflict. We can't use them, she said, her voice firm. The risk is too great. We could create something even worse than the rot. Douglas shook his head. We don't have a choice. The Krill are coming. They'll breach this facility eventually and they'll destroy everything. This is our only chance. A klaxon blared, shaking the chamber. The synthesized voice returned, tinged with urgency. Breach detected. Outer defenses compromised. Krill forces entering the facility. Douglas ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Damn it, we're out of time. He paused, his eyes scanning the chamber. Wait a minute. What's that? He pointed to a massive structure at the far end of the vault, a network of glowing crystals humming with immense power. That's the facility's power source, Juno said, puzzled. A unique energy matrix. I've never seen anything like it. And I bet it could be adapted, Douglas said, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. As a weapon, a way to fight back against the Krill. Juno's eyes widened, but it's incredibly volatile. We don't know how to control it. We'll figure it out, Douglas said, his voice filled with dedication. We have to. He looked at Juno, his gaze unwavering. Your people are counting on us. Juno nodded, her fear replaced by a newfound grit. Then let's get to work. Using her understanding of Voxari technology and Douglas's ingenuity, they began to decipher the energy matrix, working to stabilize its power and adapt it for combat. They knew the Krill would breach the main chamber soon. This was their last stand, the fate of the Voxari resting on their shoulders. The energy weapon roared to life, bathing the corridor in an eerie, violet light. A concentrated beam of modified radiation ripped through the advancing Krill, vaporizing them instantly. Their armor, their weapons, their very bodies all reduced to shimmering motes of energy that dissipated into the stale, recycled air. It's working, Douglas shouted over the weapon's whine, a triumphant grin splitting his grimy face. His elation was short-lived. The facility groaned in protest. Lights flickered erratically, plunging sections of the corridor into near darkness. Emergency sirens wailed, their shrill cries echoing through the ancient structure. Power levels dropping. Juno yelled, her voice tight with concern. The weapon is draining the facility's reserves faster than anticipated. Outside, the Krill, initially stunned by the weapon's power, began to regroup. They deployed shimmering energy shields, their advance now more cautious, more deliberate. The violet beam washed harmlessly over their defenses. They're adapting. Douglas cursed, thumping his hand against the weapon's control panel. Suddenly, a series of alarms blared, accompanied by flashing red lights near the power core. Douglas cursed, pulling up a schematic. Damn it all, he muttered, his eyes scanning the data stream. The facility's power source. It's based on unstable dark matter. Using it like this, it's creating a chain reaction. Juno's mandibles clicked in alarm. A chain reaction, what does that mean? Douglas spared her a grim look. It means the more we use this weapon, the more unstable the dark matter becomes. Eventually, it could destabilize the entire planet. We have to stop. Juno insisted, her voice rising in panic. We can't risk destroying everything to save it. We don't have a choice, Juno, Douglas snapped, his voice tinged with desperation. Those Krill aren't going to stop coming. If we don't use this weapon, we're dead. A deafening crash echoed through the facility as the Krill breached the inner defenses. The sound of heavy footsteps and guttural alien growls filled the air. They're inside. Juno cried, grabbing a discarded plasma rifle. They're coming. Douglas, his mind racing, surveyed the corridor. He remembered the facility's schematics, the hidden maintenance tunnels, the automated defense systems. Okay, listen up, he said, his voice regaining its composure. We're going to make them pay for every inch of this place. Juno, I need you to reroute power to Sector 4. I'm going to set up some traps. He sprinted down the corridor, his boots clanging against the metal floor. Using his multi-tool, he rigged explosive charges to unstable support beams, creating makeshift tripwires that would collapse sections of the ceiling. He reprogrammed automated cleaning drones to emit sonic blasts that would disorient the Krill. Meanwhile, Juno, her fingers flying across a holographic console, worked feverishly to override the facility's automated defense systems. She tapped into the Voxari network, bypassing security protocols, and redirected the facility's turrets and security drones, turning them against the Krill invaders. As the Krill advanced deeper into the facility, Douglas stumbled upon a hidden research lab. Inside, he found schematics for a handheld weapon, based on similar principles as the energy weapon. Jackpot, he breathed, grabbing the schematics and rushing back to Juno. I think I found a way out of this mess. What is it? Juno asked, her eyes darting nervously towards the approaching Krill. A handheld dark matter weapon, Douglas explained, his fingers already tracing the schematic's intricate details. If we can build it, we can take the fight to them. Juno's expression hardened. That weapon, it was designed by my ancestors, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and revulsion. It was meant to be a last resort, a weapon of planetary destruction. We're already at last resort, Juno, Douglas countered, his voice sharp. Those Krill aren't going to give us a second chance. Before Juno could respond, a large group of Krill soldiers burst through the doorway, their weapons raised, their eyes burning with predatory hunger. No time to argue, Douglas said, shoving the schematics into Juno's hands. We build this thing or we die. He began scavenging parts from the facility's damaged systems, his movements frantic and precise. He knew he could build the weapon, but he lacked the expertise to fully stabilize it. Without proper containment, the dark matter could explode, taking them all with it. I can't do it, Juno said, her voice trembling. I can't build a weapon of mass destruction. Juno, look around you, Douglas shouted, gesturing to the advancing Krill. They're going to kill us all. This is the only way. Juno hesitated, her internal conflict tearing her apart. She knew the risks, the potential consequences, but she also knew that her people's survival depended on her. Finally, she made her decision. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'll help you, but if this destroys everything, I'll never forgive you. As the Krill closed in, Douglas and Juno worked feverishly to assemble the handheld weapon. Sparks flew, wires snapped, and alarms blared as they raced against time. Finally, with the Krill just meters away, the weapon was complete. It was a crude, jury-rigged device, cobbled together from salvaged parts and fueled by unstable dark matter. It hummed with barely held-back energy, threatening to explode at any moment. Douglas raised the weapon, his hand trembling. Here goes nothing, he muttered. He squeezed the trigger. A blinding flash of light erupted from the weapon, followed by a deafening roar. A wave of unstable dark matter surged outwards, obliterating the Krill forces in an instant. The corridor was filled with the acrid smell of ozone and the faint taste of metal, but the victory was short-lived. The facility shook violently as a massive energy surge coursed through its systems. Containment fields flickered and died, releasing dangerous levels of radiation into the air. The containment systems are failing. Juno screamed, her voice barely audible over the alarms. Douglas stared at the handheld weapon, his face pale with horror. It's too unstable, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's going to destroy the entire facility. Juno, her eyes wide with a surge of hope and fear, made a pivotal decision. There's one thing we haven't tried, she shouted, already sprinting towards a nearby lab. I think I can adapt a shield. Juno plunged her hands into the nest of wires spilling from the weapon's casing, her slender fingers dancing across unfamiliar circuitry. Sparks flew, bathing her face in fleeting bursts of blue light. The air crackled with ozone. Almost. Douglas watched, arms crossed, his expression a mask of skepticism. You sure about this, Juno? Tinkering with dark matter isn't exactly like fixing a toaster. This isn't tinkering, she snapped, her voice strained. It's... A final connection clicked into place. The weapon hummed, a lower, less frantic note. Juno released a shaky breath. It's dampening, marginally. The readings on her wrist-mounted display flickered, the chaotic energy spikes slightly less pronounced. The weapon's raw power output lessened, but it was still a considerable threat. Marginally is better than not at all, Douglas conceded, hefting the weapon. It felt less volatile. Let's clear out the rest of these bastards. They moved swiftly, efficiently. The modified weapon spat bolts of contained dark matter, vaporizing the remaining Krill soldiers. Each blast left a lingering scent of burnt metal and ozone. It bought them time, precious seconds in a rapidly deteriorating situation. Sensors. Juno shouted, her voice tight with alarm. More krill, a lot more, and their shields, they're adapted, enhanced. Douglas glanced at the weapon, then at the readings on Juno's display. Damn it, they're learning fast. He could feel the facility vibrating beneath his feet, not from the krill but from something deeper. The power core, Juno gasped, her eyes wide with fear. It's reaching critical levels. Instability is off the charts. A low rumble echoed through the facility, growing louder with each passing second. Dust rained from the ceiling. Cracks spiderwebbed across the reinforced walls. Earthquakes, Juno said, her voice barely a whisper. The dark matter, it's affecting the tectonic plates. Douglas ignored her, his focus solely on the weapon. We need to maximize its power output. Now, no. Juno grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Douglas, are you not listening? Using it further will destroy the planet. And the rot cure, it's all connected. We can't worry about that right now, Douglas countered, his voice hard. We need to repel the krill. Their argument was cut short by a deafening burst of static. A cold, metallic voice filled the facility, echoing from every speaker. Voxari female, human male. This is Commander Rax of the Krill Collective. We are aware of your predicament. Douglas and Juno exchanged a wary glance. We are prepared to offer you safe passage off this planet, Rax continued, his voice devoid of emotion. In exchange for the dark matter technology, surrender the weapon and we will guarantee your survival. Douglas felt a flicker of something, hope, temptation, the chance to escape, to preserve his knowledge, to live. He looked at Juno, searching for any sign of agreement. Her eyes flashed with fury. Never, she spat. I will not betray my people. I will not allow you to gain control of this weapon. Foolish, Rax hissed. This offer is only valid for a limited time. Any further resistance will be met with complete annihilation. The transmission ended, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Douglas turned back to the weapon, his mind racing. I know how to increase its power output exponentially, he said, his voice low. But the process is irreversible. It'll guarantee a planetary meltdown. Juno stared at him, her face pale. You can't be serious. It's the only way to stop them, Douglas insisted. To buy enough time for the cure to work, if it even will. Juno stood frozen, caught between two impossible choices. Destroy her world to save it from the krill, or surrender to the enemy and condemn her people to a slow, agonizing death. Then a spark ignited in her eyes. A new tenacity hardened her features. No, she said, her voice firm. There is another way. She turned to the planetary scanners, her fingers flying across the controls. We use these. We find the planet that unleashed the rot on my world, the one that gave the order. Douglas watched her, a grim smile spreading across his face. Well, Juno, he said, I guess we're both signing our own death warrants now, one way or another. As they prepared for one last battle, Juno turned to Douglas, her eyes filled with a cold, burning fire. I promise you, Douglas Jones, she said, her voice filled with steel. The planet we find, it will pay for what was done to my people. The Krill commander's transmission dissolved into static, the chilling promise of annihilation hanging in the air. Before the last echo faded, klaxons blared, bathing the facility in a pulsing red light. Multiple contacts. Massive fleet detected, bearing 029er Mark IV. A frantic Voxari voice crackled over the comms. Signatures off the scale, they're everywhere. Douglas stared at the main view screen as dozens, then hundreds of crimson blips materialized, eclipsing the stars. This was no mere scouting party. This was an invasion. The facility shuddered. A low, guttural groan resonated through the metal framework as the first orbital bombardment struck. Lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning circuits and ozone. Shields at 70%. Another voice screamed. They're focusing fire on the population centers. Douglas gripped the edge of the console, his fingers tightening. He had to finish the upload. Juno was depending on him. The Voxari were depending on him. He forced himself to focus, his fingers flying across the alien console. The progress bar crawled agonizingly slowly. 23%. 31%. Another impact closer this time. A section of the ceiling buckled, showering sparks and debris. A chorus of panicked cries erupted from the corridor outside. Section 4 compromised, structural collapse imminent. Suddenly, a section of the wall beside him fractured, revealing a scene of utter chaos. A group of Voxari civilians, their faces contorted with terror, were trapped behind a pile of twisted metal and rubble. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. 47%. 52%. Juno rushed to his side, her eyes wide with horror. "Douglas, we have to help them." "Juno, we don't have time." Douglas shouted over the din of the attack. "The coordinates, we have to upload them." "Those are living beings, Douglas." Juno pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "We can't just leave them to die." "I know." Douglas snapped, his own heart pounding in his chest. "But if we don't upload the coordinates, this whole planet is going to die. We have to prioritize." "Prioritize." Juno's voice rose. "They're trapped. They're scared. What happened to the humanity you keep talking about? Where's your compassion?" Her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked from the trapped Voxari to the progress bar on the console, his mind racing. He knew she was right. He couldn't abandon them, but he also couldn't abandon the mission. "Damn it," he muttered, clenching his fists. "Okay, you go, I'll finish the upload." "What?" Juno stared at him, surprised. "Go save them," Douglas said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I'll finish this." "But hurry." Juno nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Be careful, Douglas." She turned and raced towards the collapsed section, disappearing into the dust and debris. 68%. 75%. Douglas forced himself to concentrate on the task at hand, his fingers flying across the console. Every impact, every explosion felt like a hammer blow against his skull. He could hear Juno shouting instructions, the sounds of metal being torn apart, the desperate cries of the trapped Voxari. The facility groaned again, and a section of the ceiling collapsed with a deafening roar. 89%. 94%. Finally, the progress bar reached 100%. "Upload complete," the computer announced in a sterile, emotionless voice. Douglas didn't waste a second. He ripped the data drive from the console and turned to find Juno. He found her pinned beneath a section of the collapsed ceiling, her body limp and still. A pool of crimson blood spread around her. "Juno," he cried, his voice raw with panic. He scrambled towards her, ignoring the falling debris and the searing pain in his legs. He heaved the section of ceiling off her, his muscles screaming in protest. Her skin was cold and clammy. He checked for a pulse, his heart pounding in his chest. It was faint, but it was there. He scooped her up in his arms, ignoring the pain in his own body. He had to get her to the cryo ship. The launch bay was a war zone. Krill fire tore through the metal walls, sending sparks and shrapnel flying. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Douglas sprinted towards the cryoship, dodging laser blasts and falling debris. He could feel Juno's life slipping away with every step. They were almost there, just a few meters from the boarding ramp, when a Krill fighter swooped in, strafing the launch bay with a hail of plasma fire. Douglas knew they wouldn't make it, not without a diversion. He looked down at the data drive in his hand, then at the dark matter weapon lying on the floor. He knew what he had to do. He gently laid Juno down near the ramp, then grabbed the dark matter weapon. He activated it, the device humming with hardly restrained energy. "Sorry, Juno," he whispered. "This is going to sting." He ran towards the center of the launch bay, drawing the Krill fire towards him. He raised the weapon and unleashed a blast of pure dark matter, creating a swirling vortex of energy that engulfed the Krill fighter. The fighter exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave throwing Douglas to the ground. The remaining Krill ships scattered, momentarily disoriented. Douglas didn't waste a second. He scrambled back to Juno, scooped her up in his arms, and staggered towards the cryoship. The ramp hissed open, and he stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor. The cryoship lurched forward, its engines screaming as it accelerated towards space. Behind them, the facility's power core reached critical mass. A blinding flash of white light engulfed the planet's surface, followed by a shockwave that rocked the cryoship violently. Douglas watched in horror as the planet below them began to crack and crumble. The explosion had weakened its core. It wouldn't survive. He managed to strap Juno into a nearby cryopod, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He ran a diagnostic scan, his heart sinking as the results came back. Her injuries were severe. She needed advanced medical attention and fast. He activated the ship's scanners, searching for any sign of civilization, any hope of rescue. The scanners beeped, locating a small, automated medical station aboard the ship. But the station required rare elements to function, elements they didn't have. As the ship warped into hyperspace, Douglas looked at the scanner image showing their destination, the Krill homeworld. It would take years to get there. He looked back at Juno, her face pale and still in the cryopod. He had to save her. He had to find a way. Then he examined the scanner image of the Krill homeworld. Something felt wrong. He zoomed in, enhancing the resolution. A network of orbital defense platforms, hidden by cloaking technology, materialized on the screen. They weren't just heading towards the Krill homeworld. They were heading into a trap. The cryoship groaned, a drawn-out metallic lament that echoed through its narrow corridors. Life support flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock their dwindling chances. Douglas moved through the cramped engineering section, his boots clanging against the grated floor, each step a stark reminder of the ship's failing systems. Engine efficiency was a ghost of its former self, barely registering on the cracked display. Long-range communications were dead, a casualty of the Krill attack. They were alone. He accessed the medical logs, the flickering screen illuminating his grim expression. The list of required elements swam before his eyes. Luminium, the display read, crystallium, others, all vital for Voxari's cellular regeneration and utterly absent from the ship's manifest. Earth medical science had never encountered, much less cataloged, such exotic compounds. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. Douglas rerouted power conduits, his movements precise and economical. He cannibalized the navigation array, diverting its energy reserves to the faltering life support systems. The navigational display sputtered and died, plunging the bridge into near darkness. Their options narrowed with each passing moment. They were running blind. A harsh, guttural screech echoed through the ship's comm system, the telltale sign of a Krill tracking pulse. They were being hunted. The sound sent a shiver down Douglas's spine. He wrestled with the helm controls, altering the ship's trajectory. They plunged into a dense asteroid field, the ship shuddering violently as it weaved between jagged rocks. Nebula clouds, shimmering with iridescent gases, offered brief moments of respite, obscuring them from the Krill scanners. The journey became longer, more perilous, but it was their only hope of shaking the pursuit. Suddenly, a faint energy signature bloomed on the damaged sensors, a distress signal. It emanated from a seemingly uninhabited planetoid in a nearby system. "Automated beacon," Douglas murmured, his eyes narrowed. The signal promised advanced medical facilities and a safe haven for refugees fleeing the Krill, a lifeline in the darkness. But something felt wrong. The signal's broadcast strength was unnaturally high, like a desperate shout that carried too far. The message itself was vague, devoid of specific details about the facilities or the nature of the aid offered. Douglas tapped furiously at the console, running a complex analysis of the signal's origin. The trajectory was inconsistent, the temporal markers skewed. The signal appeared to be older than the planetoid's current position suggested, as if it had been broadcast from a different location at a different time. A possible trap. "Damn," he repeated, the word filled with frustration and a growing sense of dread. He glanced at the life support readings. The oxygen levels were dropping. Juno needed help soon. He calculated the odds, the numbers painting a bleak picture. They were losing her. He initiated a coded message, a string of prime numbers and encrypted coordinates designed to mask their origin and species. "Unidentified vessel responding to distress call," he typed, his fingers flying across the worn keyboard. "Requesting assistance, medical emergency." The planetoid responded immediately, the reply flooding their comm system with unnerving speed. Docking coordinates appeared on the screen, along with a promise of immediate medical assistance for the injured Voxari. Too eager. Douglas ran another diagnostic, his unease growing with each passing second. The planetoid's atmosphere seemed unnaturally filtered, almost sterile. The docking bay schematics showed no signs of life support systems, only automated machinery. The message contained subtle linguistic anomalies, grammatical errors that suggested a non-Voxari origin. He turned toward Juno, still unconscious in the makeshift medical bay. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. He gently brushed a stray tendril of her hair from her forehead. "I don't trust this place, Juno," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion and worry. "Something's not right, but I don't know if we have a choice." He returned to the helm, his movements deliberate, his face a mask of steadfast perseverance. He engaged the ship's stealth systems, dampening its energy signature and reducing its profile. They would approach cautiously, weapons systems charged and ready. As they crept closer to the planetoid, the sensors painted a chilling picture. Hidden beneath the planetoid's surface, concealed within the asteroid's rocky shell, was a vast network of orbital defense platforms. Laser cannons, missile batteries, energy shields, a fortress in disguise. The safe haven was a heavily armed trap. Douglas stared at the sensor display, his heart pounding in his chest. He was faced with a choice. Risk trusting the planetoid, gamble with Juno's life, or avoid the trap and watch her fade away. It was a choice between two kinds of death. Then he noticed something else. The defense platforms were automated, unmanned. Their design was eerily familiar, a distorted echo of Krill technology. He realized the horrifying truth. It was a Krill outpost, a carefully crafted lure designed to ensnare refugees and potential enemies. A charnel house disguised as a sanctuary. Douglas hardened his eyes, his squeezing hard as he gripped the controls. He made the difficult choice, the most difficult choice of his long, frozen life. He bypassed the planetoid, charting a new course into the darkness. Juno's chances of survival dwindled with each passing moment, but he had a new idea, a desperate gamble based on something he'd seen in the ship's data logs. A way to get her the proper treatment, even if it meant facing the Krill head-on. Douglas swore, the curse muffled by the Voxari medical cowl he wore. Juno's bio readings were plummeting. The pale luminescence of her skin, usually a vibrant cyan, was fading, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. The Voxari medical systems beeped a frantic rhythm, a counterpoint to the rasping sound of Juno's breathing. "Damn it," he muttered, adjusting the nutrient feed. "The synthesized substitutes aren't working. Her system is rejecting them." He accessed the ship's database, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Luminium and crystallium deficiency," he read aloud, the words echoing in the small med bay. "Irreversible organ damage if levels aren't restored within 12 hours. 12 hours. A cosmic heartbeat. Alternative sources." He filtered the search parameters, excluding known friendly systems. The results were bleak, mostly dead-end leads and warnings about dangerous sectors. Then, a flicker of possibility, fragmented data, barely legible, about something called the Scavenger's Run. The screen displayed a chaotic jumble of sensor readings and navigational hazards, a lawless trade route, frequented by salvage crews, black marketeers, and worse, pirates preying on the weak. Krill informants lurking in the shadows. He ran a probability matrix. The risks were astronomical. Douglas leaned back, his chair groaning under his weight. He had a choice. Watch Juno die a slow, agonizing death, or gamble everything on a suicide run through the most dangerous part of the galaxy. He didn't hesitate. "Computer," he barked, "reroute all available power to the stealth systems. Initiate hull reinforcement protocols. Seal off non-essential compartments." He grabbed a plasma torch and headed for the cargo bay. He spent the next hour stripping plating from deactivated drones, welding them onto the ship's vulnerable sections. Sparks flew, illuminating his stubborn persistence. Every clang of metal was a hammer blow against the ticking clock. Back in the cockpit, he rerouted the human research ship's scanning array. "Adaptation complete," the computer announced. "Long-range sensor sweep now capable of detecting cloaked vessels and hidden weapon emplacements." A gamble, but it might just give them an edge. A soft groan came from the med bay. Douglas rushed back to Juno's side. Her eyes fluttered open, the vibrant cyan now clouded with pain. "Douglas," she whispered, her voice weak. "Save your strength," he said, gently stroking her brow. "The scavengers run." She coughed, a fleck of luminescent fluid escaping her lips. "It's dangerous." He met her gaze, his own filled with dedication. "I know, but I'm not giving up on you, Juno." A faint smile touched her lips. "I trust you." The words were barely audible before she slipped back into unconsciousness. He returned to the cockpit, his heart heavy but his commitment strengthened. He plotted a course for the scavengers' run. As the ship plunged into the nebula, the sensors went wild. A swirling vortex of cosmic dust and derelict vessels, a graveyard of broken dreams and shattered hopes. The air crackled with static, the ship's hull vibrating with unseen energies. Douglas activated a heavily encrypted comm channel. "This is..." He paused, choosing a call sign from a long-dead human pilot. "Phoenix 1 requesting information on the availability of luminium and crystallium. Discreet inquiries only, payment guaranteed." Silence stretched, punctuated only by the groaning of the ship and the hiss of the nebula's radiation. Then a response, garbled and distorted. "Phoenix 1. Heard you're looking for something. Hard to find. I might have a lead, but it will cost you dearly. Meet me at the graveyard spire. Coordinates attached." The message included a schematic of a pre-cryosleep data storage device, lost human history, a priceless artifact. Douglas cursed under his breath. He knew what this was, blackmail, but he had no choice. "Acknowledged," he transmitted. "Phoenix 1 en route." The graveyard spire was a derelict space station, a sprawling monument to decay and despair. Rust-colored tendrils of space-borne fungus clung to its hull, obscuring flickering neon signs advertising illicit goods and services. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor filled with the dregs of the galaxy, hulking mercenaries, shifty-eyed traders, and beings whose very forms defied easy categorization. He found his contact in a darkened alcove, a hulking figure shrouded in shadow. "You have the elements?" Douglas asked, his hand resting on the pulse pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "Patience human," the contact rasped, his voice a synthesized growl. "First, the artifact." Douglas reluctantly produced the data storage device. The contact snatched it, examining it with greedy eyes. "Satisfactory. The luminium and crystallium are here, but there has been a change of plans. The Krill are willing to pay a great deal more for you." Douglas's hand tightened on his pistol. "I figured as much." Before the contact could react, Douglas moved. A swift kick to the knee, a disarming strike, and the pulse pistol was in his hand. The contact crumpled to the floor, groaning. His guards lunged forward, weapons blazing. Douglas returned fire, the confined space erupting in a storm of plasma bolts. He fought his way through the station, his senses on high alert. He knew the Krill would be coming. He reached the storage bay, grabbed the containers of luminium and crystallium and sprinted back to his ship. As he reached the airlock, a squadron of Krill fighters screamed into view, their weapons locked on. The station shuddered under a barrage of laser fire. "Juno!" he cried into the comm. No response. He blasted the airlock controls, leaping back into the ship as the doors slammed shut. The ship lurched forward, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. He punched the engines to full power, weaving through the debris field. "Computer, status report." "Engines damaged," the computer reported. "Evasive maneuvers compromised. Krill fighters in pursuit." He glanced back at the med bay monitor. Juno's bio readings were flatlining. She was fading fast. He was trapped, injured, and alone, with the woman he'd come to care for dying in the back. The Krill fighters closed in, their weapons charging. He was running out of time. The station's death throes sent shrapnel screaming past the cockpit as Douglas wrestled the damaged ship away from the expanding inferno. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of impending doom, punctuated by the groan of stressed metal. He glanced at Juno, slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her skin taking on a worrying grayish pallor. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. "Hang on, Juno," he rasped, his voice strained against the G-forces. "Just hang on." He hauled her towards the makeshift medical bay, the ship bucking violently. The flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across her face, highlighting the desperation in his own. He strapped her onto the bio bed, her vital signs a terrifying series of plummeting numbers on the archaic display. There wasn't much time. Douglas fumbled with the vials of luminium and crystallium, the only hope of stabilizing her. As he inserted the first vial into the injector, a jolt ripped through the ship Krill laser fire. The ship shuddered, sparks erupting from a nearby console. The injection system sputtered, delivering only a fraction of the intended dose. "Damn it! The injector's damaged!" he yelled, his voice tight with frustration. He ripped the malfunctioning device from the wall, exposing a mess of wires and conduits. There was no time for finesse. He grabbed a manual override cable, its exposed wires crackling with energy. He could bypass the system, force the medicine directly into her veins. But the dosage would be uncontrolled, potentially lethal. An overdose could kill her faster than the rot. Another volley of laser fire hammered against the shields, the whine of deflecting energy growing higher, more strained. The ship's remaining weapon systems went silent, another casualty of the attack. "We've lost weapons," the ship's automated voice announced, dripping with synthetic despair. Douglas cursed, his mind racing. He had to buy them some time. He ripped open a panel, exposing a tangle of wires and salvaged components. He could jury-rig a decoy system, projecting false energy signatures to confuse the pursuers. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He worked frantically, sweat stinging his eyes, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the air. Finally, he slapped the makeshift device into place, activating the system. A series of false signals bloomed across the scanner, mimicking the ship's energy signature and projecting them in random directions. For a moment, it worked. The Krill fighters broke formation, several peeling off to investigate the decoys. But the respite was brief. Juno stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused, glazed with pain, but a flicker of her intelligence remained. "Douglas," she whispered, her voice weak. They know, tracking." He leaned closer, his heart pounding. "Tracking what? What do they know?" "Rot, energy, signatures." She gasped, her grip tightening on his hand. "New technology, residual energy." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The luminium and crystallium, while vital for her survival, were also amplifying her rot signature, making her a beacon for the Krill. He'd been trying to save her, but he'd inadvertently led their pursuers straight to them. "Damn it," he hissed, his heart pounding. He had to cut the signal. "Prepare to dump all remaining refined luminium and crystallium." He barked into the comm system. "Eject all reserves into space immediately." The ship shuddered as the precious cargo was jettisoned, venting into the void. It was a desperate gamble, sacrificing their only means of fighting the rot, but it was the only way to throw off the krill. "Next, we're going dark," he said, resuming his seat. "We're heading into the asteroid field." The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic jumble of rock and ice, a graveyard of shattered worlds. It was a treacherous place, riddled with hidden dangers, but it offered the best chance of evading the krill. He plunged the ship into the chaotic maze, dodging asteroids the size of small moons, the ship groaning under the strain. As he navigated the treacherous terrain, a faint signal flickered across the scanner, a hidden krill listening post disguised as a derelict freighter. "We've got company," he muttered, his hand tightening on the controls. "Krill listening post dead ahead." Before he could react, the listening post transmitted their location to the incoming krill cruisers. Their position was compromised. There was nowhere left to run. "Shields to maximum," he ordered, his voice grim. "Prepare for a final stand." He knew their chances were slim. The ship was damaged, their weapons were offline, and the Kinnell were closing in. He started rerouting power, preparing to overload the ship's core, turning it into a makeshift bomb. It was a suicidal plan, but it was the only way to take out at least one of the cruisers. Suddenly, a blip appeared on the scanner, a vessel decloaking nearby. It was sleek, dark, and heavily armed. A scavenger ship. "Unidentified vessel, identify yourself." Douglas barked into the comm system. "This is the Stardust Drifter Scavenger class," a gruff voice crackled back. "We saw you stirring up trouble with the krill. We're offering assistance in exchange for a share of any salvageable tech." As the Stardust Drifter opened fire on the krill listening post, obliterating it in a blaze of energy, Juno's condition worsened. Her breathing grew more shallow, her pulse weaker. She slipped in and out of consciousness, muttering incoherently. "She's fading fast," Douglas said, his voice tight with desperation. "We need help now. We have a solution," the captain of the Stardust Drifter replied, his voice hesitant. "Risky, but we can establish a temporary neural link, stabilize her. But it'll expose you to her thoughts, her memories." "Stabilize her. But it'll expose you to her thoughts, her memories." Douglas trailed off, his gaze locked on Juno's pallid face. The flickering bioluminescence of her skin was growing fainter. "Damn it," he muttered. He hated these choices, always a catch. He looked back up at Juno, then at the neural interface. A cable ending in a cluster of fine needles glinted in the dim light. It wasn't a choice, was it? "All right," he said, his voice rough. "Do it. But if this fries my brain, I'm haunting you both." Juno managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Douglas. I know this is difficult." He nodded, steeling himself. He lay back in the repurposed medical chair, the cold metal biting into his skin. He closed his eyes as Juno, with unsteady hands, carefully positioned the neural interface against his temple. A sharp, stinging sensation pierced his skull as the needles found their mark. Then, a flood. It wasn't just information, it was raw emotion. The searing agony of the great rot, the choking stench of decay, the gut-wrenching despair of watching loved ones succumb. He saw Juno as a child, her iridescent eyes wide with terror as her mother coughed up black ichor, her father collapsing, his skin mottled with grotesque lesions. He felt her helplessness, her rage, her burning desire to save her people. The krill. He saw them then not as distant aggressors, but as cold, calculating scientists dissecting Voxari bodies, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with cruel curiosity. He saw them specifically targeting Voxari with even the faintest trace of rot infection, isolating them, experimenting on them. Douglas gasped, his head throbbing. He ripped the interface away, his vision blurring. The krill. "They're not just killing them, they're studying them," he stammered. His head felt like it was splitting open, and he struggled to recall even simple things. What day was it? Had he eaten? He couldn't remember. Juno rushed to his side, her face etched with concern. "Douglas, are you all right? What did you see?" Before he could answer, Rax's voice boomed over the comms. Well, well, well. Looks like our little patient is getting chatty. Listen up, Doc. I know what you're doing with that neural link, and I know what you're after. A pause, then a chillingly casual tone. Turns out I need a little something too, something. Rot reactive, for a new power source. So hand it over or I might just decide your friend here isn't worth the trouble. Juno hissed, he knows about my immunity. Douglas winced, pressing his fingers to his temples. Another wave of Juno's memories crashed over him, this time a fragmented sequence of scientific data. He saw a complex waveform, a specific frequency band. And then a chilling realization. Juno, the krill, they're using a communication frequency. It's killing you. What? Juno's hand flew to her throat. Your biology, it's reacting to it, that's why you're getting weaker. He struggled to focus, his thoughts scattering like dust in the wind. What was he saying? Where was he? Damn it, Douglas, focus. Juno snapped, shaking him gently. What else did you see? The scavengers. They're tracking residual rot energy signatures, but their method. It's more sophisticated than ours. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Your immunity, it's tied to a genetic marker, V72. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared. Krill cruisers detected. They've bypassed the decoy system. The sensor officer's voice was shrill with panic. They're locking onto the frequency Juno is broadcasting. Rax's voice crackled over the comms again, filled with predatory glee. Time's up, Doc. Hand over the V72 marker. I'll even throw in a little something to help your friend. Extract it nice and clean. Of course, he added with a snide chuckle, she'll be defenseless against the rot. But hey, can't have everything, right? Juno's eyes flashed with defiance. Never. I won't let you dissect me. But Juno, Douglas began, his head pounding. No, Douglas, I need to send out a pulse. There might be other Voxari out there scattered across the system. They need to know we're still alive. But that frequency is killing you, Douglas protested. And it's attracting the krill. It's a risk I'm willing to take, Juno said, her voice firm. Douglas stared at her, torn. He knew she was right, but the thought of putting her in even more danger. We can't risk it, Juno, not now. He hesitated, then made his decision. He couldn't let her die. He moved to the comms panel while Juno was distracted. He hoped that this action would buy them more time to repair what they needed. While Juno was working in engineering, Douglas surreptitiously activated a low-power, encrypted broadcast on the frequency Juno wanted, hoping to reach any surviving Voxari without alerting the krill. It was a gamble, but he felt it was their only chance. A moment later, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the life support systems faded into silence. Rax's voice, dripping with malice, filled the sudden void. All right, Doc, fun and games are over. Hand over the V72 marker or your little friend here suffocates. Your choice. Douglas felt a surge of adrenaline. He wouldn't let them win. He glanced at Juno, her eyes wide with fear, then back at the control panel. He had an idea, a desperate, reckless idea. He rerouted all remaining power to the engines, ignoring the warnings flashing on the console. Hold on tight, Juno, he said, a grim smile on his face. He slammed the ship into full throttle, aiming straight for Rax's vessel. The smaller scavenger ship shuddered violently as it accelerated, hurtling towards the larger vessel like a metal dart. Rax's ship, caught off guard, didn't have time to react. With a deafening crash, Douglas rammed the scavenger ship's weapons array, disabling their main cannons. The scavenger ship, crippled but still functional, drifted in the void. Douglas, ignoring the damage reports flooding his console, limped away, putting as much distance as possible between them and the krill. They needed repairs, and fast. While Juno worked to restore life support, Douglas searched the scavenger ship for anything useful. In a forgotten corner behind a false panel, he found a hidden compartment. Inside, rows of stasis pods hummed softly. He activated one at random. The pod hissed open, revealing a gaunt, alien figure, its skin translucent, its eyes milky and unfocused. It coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Who are you?" Douglas asked, cautiously approaching the pod. The alien turned its head slowly, its gaze settling on Douglas. Its voice, weak but clear, rasped, "The Krill. They are not the only threat. Out there, remember, the silent choir warns of something far older, far more hungry." The alien coughed again, a fleck of blood spattering on the pod's glass. Then its eyes glazed over and it slumped back into the pod, lifeless. "Silent swarm." The words echoed in Douglas's mind, a chilling counterpoint to the klaxons blaring their impending doom. What in God's name is a silent swarm? He muttered, more to himself than to Juno. The Voxari engineer's mandibles clicked in distress. Atmospheric pressure dropping. Hull breaches expanding. "We have limited time." Her multifaceted eyes darted between the readouts and Douglas, radiating a desperate plea for action. "There," Juno jabbed a claw at a holographic display. "Derelict Voxari Research Station. Abandoned after the initial Krill incursions. It is our best option." Douglas ran a hand over his stubbled chin, his gaze fixed on the schematic. "A derelict station could be a Krill trap, Juno. They could be waiting. A risk we must take," she insisted, her voice tight. "The scavenger ship cannot sustain us, the station. It has repair facilities power. It is our only chance." He knew she was right. "All right, let's get moving. But keep your weapon ready." He surveyed the mangled remains of the alien tech scattered around the cockpit. "First, we need to seal these breaches. Anything that can act as a sealant." Juno rummaged through a storage compartment, producing a viscous, luminescent resin. "Scavenger ship component. Emergency sealant. It is. Crude but functional." Douglas nodded, grabbing the resin applicator. "Crude is better than vacuum." He began applying the sealant to the largest hull breach, the resin hissing as it reacted with the escaping atmosphere. Sparks flew as he worked, the metallic tang of ozone filling the air. As Douglas worked, Juno frantically tapped at the station's schematics. "There," she exclaimed, a flicker of hope in her voice. "The station. It has a hidden experimental warp drive prototype if we can repair it." "One thing at a time, Juno," Douglas grunted, wrestling with a stubborn panel. "First, we need to not die." He managed to secure the panel, the hissing diminishing. "That should do it, for now." The klaxons softened to a persistent drone. "Hull integrity improving," Juno announced, her voice regaining a measure of composure. "But life support, still unstable." With the major breaches sealed, they limped towards the derelict station, the scavenger ship groaning under the strain. As they approached, the station loomed before them, a skeletal framework against the star-dusted void. It was eerily silent, yet faint lights flickered within its darkened corridors. "Docking clamps engaged," Juno announced, her hands trembling slightly. "Power, still running, but minimal life support." They floated through the station's corridors, the silence amplifying every creak and groan of the ancient structure. Douglas kept his weapon raised, his senses on high alert. "Repair bay," Juno announced, pointing towards a massive chamber filled with robotic arms and diagnostic equipment. "Functional, but designed for Voxari ships. Modifications will be necessary." Douglas surveyed the bay, his eyes gleaming with a spark of engineering curiosity. "Nothing I can't handle, but we need to stabilize life support first." Juno, meanwhile, was hunched over a console, scrolling through the station's logs. "The warp drive, experimental, highly unstable, requires a rare element for stabilization. Isomer 7. As she spoke, Douglas's hand flew to his ear, activating a hidden comm. "Juno, I'm picking up faint life signs. Stasis pods on the scavenger ship. They're failing." Juno's mandibles tightened. "The warp drive is our priority, Douglas. If we can reach other colonies, we can save countless Voxari lives." "And what about the lives already on board?" Douglas countered, his voice hardening. "We can't just leave them to die. We do not know what is in those pods." Juno snapped, her eyes flashing. "They could be Krill sleeper agents. The risk is too great." Douglas stared at her, his expression resolute. I'm going to check those pods, Juno. I can't live with myself if I don't. He turned and headed back towards the docking clamps, his boots echoing in the silent corridor. Juno watched him go, her expression a mixture of frustration and something else. Respect. Douglas reached the scavenger ship and cycled the docking clamps. The stasis pods hummed faintly, their internal lights flickering erratically. He selected one at random and initiated the release sequence. The pod hissed open, revealing a small, frail figure curled within. It was a child, with skin the color of amethyst and large, luminous eyes. Not Voxari, the same species as the dying alien. She was barely breathing. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the station. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridors in an ominous glow. Krill, Juno's voice crackled over the comm. Scout ship, decloaking nearby. Douglas cursed under his breath. They tracked our energy signature. He needed a distraction, something to buy them time. His eyes fell on the warp drive power core, humming with almost unchecked energy. Juno, I need you to reroute all power from the station's shields to the warp drive core, he barked into the comm. Now, what are you doing? She demanded, but he could hear the frantic tapping of her claws on the console. Creating a diversion, he replied grimly. A big one. He worked quickly, rerouting the power conduits, sweat beading on his forehead. The warp drive core began to glow with an unearthly light, the air crackling with energy. With a final surge, he overloaded the core, unleashing a localized warp distortion. The station shuddered violently, alarms screaming. Outside, the Krill scout ship, caught in the distortion, was thrown wildly off course. Its shields flickered and died, its hull buckling under the strain. It managed to fire off a distress signal before crashing into a nearby asteroid field. They transmitted our location. Juno screamed over the comm. More ships are coming. Douglas rushed back to Juno, ignoring the chaos around them. What about the warp drive? Can we fix it? Juno shook her head, her expression grim. The logs, Isomer 7, it is only found in the bodies of the swarm. The experimental ship is useless. Douglas stared at her, his mind racing. The swarm, it's not a natural phenomenon, is it? It's a weapon. He turned back to the child, lying limp in the stasis pod. As he looked at her, he noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer beneath her skin. Juno, he said slowly, his voice filled with dread. I think she's a carrier of the swarm's contagion. Douglas slammed the isolation door shut, the hiss of the seal echoing in the small chamber. The child, no older than 10 by human standards, lay curled on the bio bed, its breathing shallow and ragged. The airlock hissed open and Juno stepped inside, her multifaceted eyes filled with fierce dedication. It's contained, Douglas said, his voice tight, for now. He gestured to the bio bed. I've rerouted the environmental controls. Full quarantine protocols are engaged. Juno approached the bed, her mandibles clicking softly. The logical course is clear, Douglas. Euthanasia. Prevent further spread. Douglas recoiled, his face hardening. Euthanasia, it's a child, Juno. A vector, she countered, her voice devoid of emotion. A biological weapon. Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. He shook his head, grabbing a handheld scanner. I need to understand what we're dealing with. There has to be a way to reverse this. He ran the scanner over the child's frail form, the device emitting a series of rapid beeps. The readings flickered across the screen, a chaotic jumble of alien biochemistry. The Voxari have a history with biological warfare, Juno said, her voice low. We understand the necessity of difficult choices. We are more prone to accept the loss of a single life if it saves countless others. Douglas ignored her, his focus narrowed on the scanner readings. Engineered components. I'm seeing traces of the swarm's signature, but it's different, more complex. He zoomed in on a specific sequence, his brow furrowing. This isn't just a carrier, it's a seed. A seed. Juno tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Genetically engineered, Douglas explained, his voice grim. Designed to accelerate the swarm's spread, it's meant to infect entire worlds. Suddenly, the child stirred, its eyes fluttering open. They were the color of deep space, filled with an ancient, unsettling wisdom. A voice, thin and reedy, echoed in Douglas's mind. "Help me. Please, I don't want to be this." Douglas stumbled back, dropping the scanner. "Did you hear that?" Juno remained motionless. "Hear what?" "Douglas, you are experiencing stress, the cryo sleep." "It spoke to me," he insisted, his heart pounding. "Telepathically, it doesn't want to be a weapon." He knelt beside the child, his gaze searching its face. "Who created you? What are you?" The child's voice echoed again, weaker this time. I don't know, I just want it to stop." Douglas stood, his mind racing. He had to find answers. The station's AI, it might have data on the swarm's origins. "The AI is corrupted," Juno warned, her voice sharp. "It's a vector for the swarm, it must be purged." "We can't just destroy it," Douglas argued. "It's our only chance to understand what we're facing, to find a cure." He turned and strode towards the door. "I'm going to access the AI. You can stay here and do what you think is necessary." He left Juno standing beside the child, her expression a mask of conflicted emotions. Douglas navigated the derelict corridors, his boots echoing in the silence. He reached the AI core, a vast chamber filled with flickering consoles and humming machinery. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. He connected his neural interface to the central console, and the AI flickered to life, its ancient code flooding his mind. He navigated through layers of corrupted data, searching for any mention of the swarm. Accessing historical records. Krill Collective. The AI's voice echoed in his mind, cold and mechanical. Swarm origin. Designated Project Genesis. Created from dormant lifeform. Ancient. Unknown. Suddenly, the AI's processing shifted, forcing Douglas to see old data. Accessing Earth research projects. The AI's voice echoed, now tinged with something that sounded eerily like curiosity. Alarms blared throughout the station. Juno's voice crackled over the comms. "Douglas, Krill ships approaching. Multiple contacts, they're heading straight for us." Douglas ripped himself away from the console, his mind blown. The Krill were here, he had to act fast. He needed that data. Earth project. Designated Pandora, the AI forced to his mind. He isolated the file, a compressed data packet containing the schematics and research notes from the Earth project. He severed the connection to the AI and scrambled back to the main control room. "Juno, status report." "They're deploying fighters," she replied, her voice strained. "They know we're here. They're not going to let us leave." Douglas hit his fist on the console. "I need access to the station's weapon systems. Now." "The station is under lockdown," Juno countered. "Security protocols are in place. I cannot override them." "Override them," Douglas roared. "We don't have time for bureaucracy. Those fighters will tear us apart." He overrode the security protocols and used his engineering skills to reroute power to the station's energy weapons. The station shuddered as the weapons powered up, targeting the incoming Krill fighters. Beams of searing energy lanced out into space, vaporizing several of the enemy vessels. "It bought us some time," Douglas said, his voice grim. "But they'll be back. We need to fortify this station." He and Juno worked together, sealing off corridors, activating automated defense systems, and setting up makeshift barricades. The station transformed into a fortress, a desperate attempt to hold back the inevitable. The first Krill boarding pod slammed into the station's hull, and the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the corridors. The Krill were inside. "They're in Sector 4. Juno shouted, firing her plasma rifle down a narrow corridor. "Heavy armor. They're heading for the lab." Douglas raced back to the lab, his mind focused on the Earth data. He had to find a way to stop the swarm, to save the child, to save the Voxari. He accessed the Earth data and began working feverishly, adapting the human research to Voxari biology. He needed to create an antivirus, something that could neutralize the swarm's engineered components. Hours blurred into minutes as he worked, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. Finally, he had it, a potential antivirus, but it needed a catalyst, something unique to the child's physiology. He turned to Juno, his face etched with exhaustion. "I need a sample from the child, a cellular sample." Juno hesitated, her expression conflicted. "You know what this means, Douglas. If we extract that sample, we risk killing it. Even if we succeed, it may be too late to save the Voxari. Other worlds may be at risk." "I know," Douglas said, his voice barely a whisper, "but it's our only chance." Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, stronger this time. "Do it, please, if it can save others." "I want to help." Douglas closed his eyes, his heart breaking. He looked back at Juno. "It's willing." Before they could act, the lab door exploded inward, showering them with sparks and debris. A Krill warrior clad in black armor stood silhouetted in the doorway, its weapon raised. The Krill warrior fired, and the lab equipment shattered, spraying a cloud of microscopic particles into the air. The swarm contagion. Released. Douglas slammed the override switch, the heavy lab doors hissing shut with finality. Red emergency lights pulsed, bathing the room in a bloody glow. He was trapped. Juno, the child, and the swarm were trapped with him. Juno, her face a mask of fierce dedication, punched a series of commands into a nearby console. "Activating emergency sterilization protocol," she announced, her voice tight. A high-pitched whine filled the air as nozzles in the ceiling sprayed a dense mist throughout the lab. The swarm, however, seemed unaffected. The glistening, microscopic organisms continued to writhe and pulse, their collective movement like a living oil slick. The sterilization agent was useless. Cursing under his breath, Douglas ripped panels off a nearby workstation, exposing a tangle of wires and circuit boards. Sparks flew as he spliced together components, his movements precise and economical. "We need something to contain this," he muttered, more to himself than Juno. "A localized field, a biocontainment barrier." Within minutes, a shimmering, translucent dome crackled into existence, enclosing a section of the lab floor. It wasn't perfect, but it slowed the swarm's advance, forcing them to concentrate within its confines. The partially infected Krill warrior, however, was not deterred. It lunged, its bladed limbs slashing at Juno with brutal efficiency. Juno, despite her smaller stature, met the attack head-on, her movements a blur of Voxari martial arts. She parried a blow, the Krill blade screeching against her energy shield, and countered with a swift kick to the warrior's chest. The Krill stumbled but recovered quickly, its guttural roars echoing through the lab. The fight was desperate, a whirlwind of alien fury and Voxari resilience. Finally, with a desperate lunge, Juno drove a shard of broken equipment into the Krill's exposed neck joint. The warrior convulsed, then collapsed, its massive body thudding against the floor. Juno stood panting, her chest heaving, blood dripping from a shallow cut on her arm, her breath hitched. "Damn it," she rasped, staring at the wound. The swarm. Some of it had gotten through. She was infected. Douglas, his face etched with concern, turned back to the central console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He needed answers, and fast. He dredged up the old Earth data, sifting through terabytes of information until he found what he was looking for, detailed schematics of retroviral manipulation. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, his voice low. The original human research. It wasn't just about cures. It was about weaponizing dormant retroviruses, too. The Krill hadn't just created a plague, they'd weaponized a process humanity had pioneered and then abandoned, a twisted echo of Earth's darkest secrets. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station, a klaxon wailing a death knell. A synthesized voice cut through the chaos. "Initiating failsafe protocol. Cleansing sequence commencing in T-15 minutes. All biological hosts will be terminated." The Krill ships, realizing their boarding party had failed, were about to sterilize the station, swarm and all. Douglas's eyes darted to the child, its large, luminous eyes fixed on him. He remembered the readings, the unique cellular structure. "The child," he exclaimed, his voice filled with a sudden, desperate hope. "Its cells. They contain a unique enzyme, something that can neutralize the retroviral weapon." Juno swayed, her face pale, her bioluminescent markings dimming. "Douglas, it's getting worse," she gasped, clutching her arm. The swarm was spreading, its tendrils reaching through her veins, poisoning her from the inside out. The clock was ticking. "I can synthesize an antivirus," Douglas said, his voice tight with urgency, "but the equipment, it's damaged. It'll take too long." He began inputting commands, initiating the synthesis sequence, but the progress bar crawled at a snail's pace. A wave of emotion washed over him, a mental image not his own. It was the child, its thoughts projecting directly into his mind. "I can help," the thought echoed, clear and distinct. "I know how to accelerate the enzyme production." "How?" Douglas asked aloud, his fingers still flying across the keyboard. "I need to integrate," the child's thought continued, "with the bioprinter, fully integrate. I can rewrite the code, accelerate the process." Juno coughed, a ragged, wet sound. "Douglas," she pleaded, her voice weak. "There isn't much time. You have to decide, me, or the swarm, or the child. You can't save everyone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with despair. Douglas stared at the child, then at Juno, his face a battleground of conflicting emotions. Sacrifice the child, an innocent, to synthesize the antivirus and save Juno, or risk the swarm spreading, condemning countless others and losing Juno in the process. It was an impossible choice, a Sophie's choice played out on a dying space station. He made his decision. "Help the child," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do what I can." He reconfigured the bioprinter, rerouting power, bypassing damaged circuits. "Ready," he said to the child. "Integrate." As the child reached out, its small hand touching the bioprinter's interface, a surge of energy ripped through the lab. Lights flickered, consoles sparked, and the air crackled with static electricity. The energy spike wouldn't go unnoticed. Somewhere on the station, the Krill boarding party would feel it, would know something was happening. The integration process had begun. He could see the change in Juno almost immediately. The color returned to her face, her bioluminescent markings glowed brighter, and her breathing became easier. The swarm, it seemed, was being pushed back. But as hope flickered, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. The containment field, it was failing. The swarm was about to break free. Douglas felt a shift in the station's power grid, a subtle but unmistakable drain. He knew with a chilling certainty what was happening, the Krill failsafe. It wasn't just targeting biological hosts. It was targeting the station's core systems, the very infrastructure that kept them alive. He couldn't disconnect the child now. To do so would be to kill them all. Then, a sound that cut through everything, a high-pitched, keening scream. The child was screaming, a telepathic torrent of pain and terror that threatened to overwhelm his mind. The child's scream intensified, a piercing sound that resonated through the station, vibrating in Douglas's very bones. Red lights pulsed rhythmically, casting long, distorted shadows across the control panels as the failsafe system targeted the station's core. The air crackled with energy, the metallic tang of ozone sharp in his nostrils. Douglas's hands moved with frantic precision, a blur of motion as he fought to disconnect the child fully from the system. Sparks flew as he ripped out cables, bypassing safety protocols with a desperate disregard for the station's integrity. Each failed attempt ratcheted up the tension, the countdown timer flashing ominously in the corner of his vision. Almost there. He muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. He could feel the heat radiating from the core, the failsafe building to its deadly crescendo. With a final, desperate yank, he severed the last connection, but the system still needed power. He rerouted power from life support, the station groaning under the strain. Alarms blared, warning of critical system failures, but he couldn't stop. He had to accelerate the enzyme production, even if it meant risking his own life. The air grew thin, the temperature plummeting, but he pressed on, his focus laser locked on the child. Juno, her Voxari skin regaining its natural luminescence but still marred by the rot's lingering touch, stumbled into the control room. She was weakened, unsteady on her feet, but her eyes burned with persistence. "Douglas, I can help." Using her intimate connection to the station systems, a skill born from generations of Voxari engineers, she attempted to override the failsafe targeting parameters. Her fingers danced across the console, her voice a rapid-fire stream of Voxari commands. The override failed, a jarring red error message flashing across the screen. Despair flickered across her face, but she didn't give up. "Wait, there's a secondary protocol. A failsafe for the failsafe. It would redirect the energy to the Krill homeworld." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Douglas paused, his hand still hovering over the console. The Krill, the source of all this suffering. Could he condemn an entire species to save his own? Could he become the monster he was fighting? He looked at Juno, her face etched with exhaustion and hope. He looked at the child, its innocent form suspended in the life-giving fluid. He thought of Earth, of the ideals humanity had once strived for. "No," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "We won't do it. We won't become them." Then a spark of inspiration ignited in his mind. The enzyme. It wasn't just a cure, it was a key that could unlock the Krill's biological vulnerabilities. Juno, the enzyme. What if we could weaponize it, not to kill but to disrupt, to break their connection to the hosts, to reverse it? We don't kill them, but we kill the plague that is them. He began to adapt the human tech, his fingers flying across the console, fueled by adrenaline and renewed purpose. He worked tirelessly, modifying the enzyme sequence, creating a retroviral weapon that would target the Krill Collective's reliance on biological hosts. This could work, he said, a grin spreading across his face. "We can hit them at their source." He broadcast the modified enzyme sequence to all ships, a wave of data rippling through the comms network. "All ships, this is Douglas. We have a new weapon. Inoculate your ships with the original enzyme, then prepare for an all-out assault. We're taking the fight to the Krill." Juno, now fully recovered, stood tall and proud, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. She turned to Douglas, her hand resting on his. "I will lead the fleet. You stay here and ensure the enzyme keeps flowing." The Voxari fleet, inoculated and ready, surged forward, Juno leading the charge in her flagship. Douglas watched from the station, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation, as the battle unfolded in the void above. The enzyme weapon was deployed, a targeted strike against the Krill's biological infrastructure. The effect was immediate and devastating. Their ships faltered, their weapons sputtered, their carefully constructed society began to crumble from within. The Krill Collective, crippled and vulnerable, were no match for the combined might of the Voxari fleet. The tide had turned. Victory was at hand. On the surface of the Voxari homeworld, the great rot began to recede, the creeping blight retreating as the cure took effect. Life returned to the ravaged landscape. The air grew cleaner, the water purer. The Voxari population, decimated but not defeated, began to recover, their spirits lifted by the promise of a brighter future. Douglas and Juno stood side by side, overlooking the revitalized Voxari landscape. The sky, once choked with toxic fumes, was now a clear, vibrant blue. The sun shone down on the verdant fields, a symbol of hope and renewal. "We did it," Juno said, her voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Douglas smiled, his arm around her. "We did it together." Suddenly, the child appeared before them, its eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom. "There are others," it said, its voice clear and strong. "Other humans scattered throughout the galaxy, sleeping in cryopods. They are waiting to be awakened." Douglas and Juno exchanged a knowing glance. Their journey was nowhere near the end.